I can tell you if that wasn't in there, we would have just skipped right over it.
Yep, we would have.
So, as funny as it is that you got to put these in, it's very useful. Don't need any more of that.
Meredith's probably laughing at us because she does this on a regular basis every single day and she's a pro at it. So we probably could take lessons from her.
Yes.
I have seen them in action. They are amazing.
We could use some, well, and that's the problem too, right? Like all of us do it. We might not do it as much as we were doing it, which is okay too. But at one point in time, we were all really proficient at it. Now we're like, just sort of every time we do it, we're a little rusty at it. And it shows, but I guess we'll get through it. Follow us on social media. We are active on Facebook, Twitter, not so much on YouTube. And I don't say that to discourage anyone from going to YouTube and trying to find us. We just don't have anything that we've put out there yet. Having said that, you'll probably start to see some of these PBIS videos that we've shared, some of the ones that we've shared in the past, as well as the ones that we just shared. Was it last week we sent out the video? That would be a really good place for that to live, is on YouTube. So we should probably mark that down for ourselves to do, but
Maybe on our action plan.
there you go. We are your consultants. And I say that in the most sort of humble of ways, meaning we're really here for you, specifically these office hours. That's exactly what we want these to be, dedicated time for you, to help support you in whatever your needs might be. Because obviously in our other sessions, we don't have the time to do that specifically in those sessions. And we want these sessions to be all about that. So not that you have problems, but if you need a partner to think through some of these things with, or you're struggling with something, these are the sessions for you to come to us. If we all can't, certainly one of the three can help, if not all the three of us. So think about that, consider that, and certainly, take advantage of that today. I am Matthew Heath, though. I guess I shouldn't go without saying I'm in the middle there. I'm joined today by my two colleagues, Jessica Dedick and Marla Peachoff. I feel like I'm presenting to this huge group, which I don't know why I needed to do that, but.
Because we're recording, so.
Yeah, it's true.
It's going to the cloud.
But to start off, to get things started on the right foot, we wanted to talk about and for you to consider what, what your win is. So in the chat or unmute, again, there's not very many of us, so unmute yourselves and share what it is a win that you want to celebrate, whether that's this week, this month. Hopefully it's around PBIS, because we are here to talk about PBIS. So we would hope for you to, I do, maybe Marla, she might open it up to something greater than just PBIS, but just to keep us focused. I'm thinking more in terms of PBIS. So what's one thing that you could celebrate for you or your team regarding a win?
I can jump in if no one has an example yet. Marla's been talking to us when we do our monthly PBIS committee meetings here at Buckeye Online, and one of our, goals that we'd been aiming for since the start of the school year was to find new student representatives. We do have a senior that is currently on our committee with us to give us a unique perspective or point of view. But the other student member graduated as of last year, and so we were kind of brainstorming and coming up with suggestions for who could also potentially join our team. And we reached out to the other different grade bands, especially 11, 12. I'm in the 9th, 10th grade TBT personally, so we try and find some upperclassmen to kind of fill that gap and help us out a bit. And there were so many positive suggestions. I mean, the list, each grade level came up with maybe 4 or 5 really enthusiastic, motivated students that want to help. And so it's just great to have a lot of options to kind of go through, especially if, the first 1 or 2 that we ask, maybe they don't have time for it in their schedule or whatnot. But I just thought it was really great that we have a lot of possibilities on the list, as opposed to really kind of just searching for maybe 1 or 2. So I'm going to chalk that up as a win.
That is awesome, Meredith. And you know, I've said this openly. Your student representative that you have right now, she is phenomenal. She just, I always want to say out of the mouths of babes, she comes up with ideas that you sit back and say, well, why didn't I think of that?
Which I think Marla's actually shared that with this group.
Oh, I brag about them all the
Yeah.
time.
She's like, we need, and the name has escaped me. But I
Leah,
know what,
Yes.
I know
Leah.
that she specifically said, we need and inserted the student's name in our group. Just because when we're brainstorming and trying to think of different things or, just considerations, she said, we need that, that different perspective.
Mhm.
So she's definitely saying her praises here.
Actually, the whole team.
Mhm.
I think it also even just cements further how important it is to involve our scholars, our students into this work, because they will shed light on things that we may not have realized or maybe didn't know how to approach. But thank you, Meredith.
All right.
Susan, you have a win in the chat. What's your win? There's only 3 of us. We're gonna force you all to talk.
It's hard to.
Good morning, everyone. A big win I feel is going over the rubric that was provided by the SST in order to get the bronze or silver or gold recognition. A lot of the districts that I support were going for bronze. So something that I did to help support the districts that I work with, I created an action plan that had their TFI score on what they gave themselves in April of 2022. And then the feedback that SST gave right below that of what action steps we took. And it's really been very helpful. I know a lot of the schools that I support really appreciated to see the SST feedback right on the action plan, because the day one when we met in September for their PBIS meeting, they right away went to the scores that were like ones to say, okay, how can we improve this? So I can share with you. Can I share my screen? Is that easier, or do you want me to share the link?
Whatever you like. Matthew, would you like to unshare so Susan can share?
Yeah, I don't have any problem with that.
Matthew again's in the driver's seat.
ahead,
Okay.
Susan.
So I can share with you what I'm talking about. Am I ready, Matt?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. So can you see my screen?
Yes.
Perfect. All right. So as you can see, let me scroll up. Maybe cover your eyes because I'm scrolling. So right here on April 2022, which was the spring, we did the TFI and they scored themselves. So as you can see, they gave themselves a 2 on the 1.1 team composition. And the reason why they gave themselves a 2, this is an easier one, is they added 2 teachers to their team. This is elementary. They added a counselor to help them with the behaviors over the period of time. And they added a parent. That was really important for them, for the elementary, was to have a parent voice, and a parent voice outside of someone who is engaged already in the school system as a teacher or as a classified person. So we wanted a parent that is got children, of course, in the school, but is not connected per se as having a job there. And then you can see the feedback that was given. So that was just an easy one. And I put the feedback right on there so they can see it instead of going to another document. But one that we're working on is this one right here, the discipline policies. Here they gave themselves a 2 because they felt like they added the flow chart to the handbook, the teacher handbook, and they updated the discipline policy to be positive and created restorative approaches to discipline. But they know the 2 points that they need to work on this, because they got all their points but 2, and one was in this area. This was the feedback that the SST gave. Thank you for sharing your evidence in this section. The growth in the area of the policies and practices is apparent, but how can you further align the flow chart and the matrix language throughout the handbook? and they reference the page numbers. And so remember to have the importance of consistency. So that is something that they know as a team that they're going to work on. And so they're hitting the ground running with just that. So I thought this was like something that was a big win for them, because then they can see immediately what kind of action steps they need to take. And another area, and then we, of course, we celebrated all their strengths that they had with all their feedback that they gave. For example, on 1.11, they thought they were a 1, but making gains, but SST felt like they were a 2, and they felt they're making gains in that area because they had a family survey was completed. They did a comparison chart that shows the growth from one survey to the next. And it said there's an inclusion of a family member on your team, and you'll want to consider adding a question that asks if the families would like to see any changes in the PBIS system at Latonia Elementary. So just really having some of that parent voice, it got them thinking, okay, they gave us a 2, but how can we make that survey a little bit better and more robust? So just wanted to give you that as something that maybe you can do as being the PBIS leader. You can take that feedback right from what they gave you on that rubric from SST and plug it right into your action plan, and you can see your results as you go. So I just wanted to share that. That was a win for a lot of the districts and schools that I support. So thank you.
Wow. That's like
Wow.
we put her in there for as a.
I think she did her homework. She actually looked at what we were going to do today and actually
Yeah.
did some homework there. Nice
Once in a
work,
while, I
Susan.
come prepared. Once in a while.
Don't let Susan kid you. She is prepared all the time.
Thank you,
Um,
Marla.
Did you see that Julie also added something?
Yes, I
like that?
did. And I'm excited about this one because I knew they were doing this last year. So now what's happening with it?
It's actually gone very, very well. The high school differentiated its team a little bit. They have one of their stronger PBIS advocates just focusing on tier 1, and another one that is focusing on more tier 2/tier 3. So with the tier 1, that person is really overseeing the PBIS rewards and the implementation of it this fall. They've started a student of the week. And so every week, based on data and staff determination, there's a different student of the week. And that person is like their picture is taken, it's sent out on the district email. They get a nice, they get their picture taken in front of a nice lakeside background. I don't know what else you want to call it. And they get like a certificate. I think they're getting a shirt and some kind of other prize. And then the rewards. So the first couple weeks of school, they had different lesson plans for each day, focusing on a different area of the matrix. And then as they rolled out the PBIS rewards, they were tracking like how many teachers were giving out rewards, what times of the day they were giving out rewards, having personal conversations with the ones that hadn't been rewarding, but sharing out the overall implementation by the adults. And that was kind of a little motivator to get some of the rest of them on board. Yeah. And then they've been taking a look at that data. And then they also added students to their like student advisory. So they've got students that are coming and meeting with the administration and teachers on a regular basis. And they're talking everything from culture, climate, academics, student needs, wants, without the, you know, throughout the entire building, all programming from, you know, extracurriculars, athletics, academics, you know, culture, climate, safety, really the whole 9 yards. So they're doing a really nice job up there with it. But Marla was instrumental in helping us. One of the teachers and I went to the high school PBIS think tank one day at lunch, and we heard about the PBIS rewards program. So I reached out to Marla. she connected us with someone at Sebring who had implemented it there. And then we had several conversations over the course of February, March, and April, and then decided to take the plunge in May, and it was a great plunge to take, so.
Right.
And then we also brought Kelvin Oliver. We purchased 8 sessions with him on a virtual collaboration this year. And we're working to bring him to the district again, hopefully this year in person. But we did purchase 8 2-hour virtual collaboration sessions with him. And Jessica was just up here on the 28th for our first one.
Yeah, he had a lot of great information.
He's really
to share.
helping us with, yeah, he's really helping us with like the restorative practices across the board. Just another way we can align it with PBIS.
Wow, I felt like I was asking for some small wins, and what I got back was some really, really, really big wins. So thank you, everybody. I do want to say that, hold on one second, that I feel like I should share one of our wins that we've had over the since our previous session and today's office hours. I feel like as a team, we've implemented, and you'll see those things coming up here in the upcoming slides. We've implemented some things and tried to change some of what we were doing and have it sort of reflect more of what PBIS should look like, which should go without saying, but it's very much like one of those situations where we didn't want to just continue to talk the talk. We also wanted to walk the walk. You know, it's not just enough to talk about it. We also wanted to be about it. So you're going to see some of that stuff. I think some of you may have already actually received some things in your chat that I'm referring to. I'm trying not to give anything away. That's one of the things, though.
I think Susan did, because I'm seeing her smile. I'm not sure. Meredith has a little smile on her face. I'm not sure either, but.
So I'll not, I'll bring it up again, but the first thing being is our high five. So if maybe you've already received a high five. If you haven't, hopefully you do receive a high five. But we wanted to figure out a way to better the engagement in our sessions. And one of the ways that we decided to do that was to implement a sort of
Acknowledgement system
within our virtual session or setting.
So that is so cool. I'm not muted.
Do this.
No,
Sorry.
Honestly, that was such a great response, because you couldn't say it any better, Julie. Thank you.
Well,
Not
we appreciate your engagement in our discussions, and we want to point out our meeting expectations, just like you do in yours. Sorry, Matt.
No, that's fine. Jessica said it. That's exactly 100% what we were looking to do. And we want to model what it is that we're talking about. So we thought, what a better way to do that than to, again, have some sort of acknowledgement system in place to reward what, I don't want to say reward, to acknowledge the expectations that we have when we're together, which we're going to go over those, because we've actually changed those too, which for me, that was another win. We didn't just, too often our meetings consist of norms and expectations that we don't really live by, or they don't really leverage us as a team to get any better. And we looked at ours and we went, well, what do we really need to work on? So you'll see some changes there. I'll talk about those. But before we do that, there is a note-taking document. There's a Padlet specifically for office hours. Marla or Jessica is probably putting those in the chat right now.
They were just put in the chat because I know Jane just entered the room. So I wanted to make sure that they were in the chat, but they were also in their email as well.
All right, so you have access to both of those. If you'd like to use those, if not, we will not be offended. But talking about those expectations, here they are. Again, you'll see some changes being made, but our meeting matrix today, we have be respectful, be responsible, be a problem solver. And the way that we are going to demonstrate being respectful is having our cameras on, completing pre-work prior to meetings, always presuming positive intent. And the way that we show being responsible is be an active participant by unmuting and sharing ideas, taking care of those personal needs, returning promptly from breaks and activities. And being a problem solver looks like when you seek clarification, you ask questions, use positive statements and restatements, and always have fun, which I hope that we're doing that together already. So not too terribly difficult of expectations to meet. But again, we did revise those so they would help leverage us to be better as a group.
And I think that last one, especially being that problem solver, asking for clarifications is really important for this particular session, because that's what it's all about. Hopefully you come with your questions and we can hopefully help you problem solve through it.
We do have some objectives for the day. I'm not going to go into detail. There they are. We're going to keep this pretty relaxed. That way we can get to the meat of everything, because that's what this is really about. I said it earlier, it's about supporting you. So I'd really like us to get to where we're doing that. And you're talking and not us talking. So here's our agenda. We're going to look at, and it's very similar to the video that we sent out, in that we're going to look at the importance of action plans, some data. We're going to get into some binder reminders, which we thought that was a pretty cute. We did steal that from someone else though, so we can't take full ownership of it. So by all means, if that's something that you want to do back with your team, is create binder reminders. It's again a cute way to go about getting into the work, and then finish with an optimistic closure and go about our days. So
Spreading sunshine and joy.
that's right. But before we do that, well, as always, we'd like to start with some intention setting. And again, we're not going to draw this out. So if you've got a notepad or in your note-taking document, there's a place for you to jot these things down. Or I guess you don't have to, you can type them in. But just sort of create some intentions for yourself and what you hope to get out of today and how you're going to do that. Because again, this is ultimately about you. So what is it that you hope to achieve or to gain from this time together? Because we could certainly create all kinds of agendas and objectives and miss the target entirely as far as your needs. So jot those down, use those to guide and direct you through our time together. And we'll do our best to help you meet your intentions. Next up, I think Marla's going to get into details about the planning process. So as you're finishing your thoughts up with those intentions, she's going to pick up where I left off and start talking about action planning.
So even though these slides resemble most of the slides that you saw in the video, our intention is really just to even go deeper, because in the video, we talked through some things, but what we want to do is actually hear from you, because each time you share something with us, we are able to continue to build our capacity, but also the capacity of others. But this has always been one of my favorite quotes, because it really is true. It's about everything in life. If we do not plan, then odds are it's not going to turn out the way that we want it to turn out. It may turn out. It may not turn out in the time span. It may not turn out the way we want it. It may fall apart in the midstream, but our goal is to actually think about that planning piece. So thinking about that action planning, and Meredith, not to put you on the spot, but now we're here to support you, and you get to take it all back to boss. And Susan and Jane, who's joined us, also think about how you can take this back to the teams that you support. So and this is hard, Meredith, because I've been with you, but share with us, like, what steps has your team taken towards revising? Because I know you had an action plan already. So revising your action plan for this next school year, or even the next 100 days or so. And again, please feel free to unmute, just talk with us, because
Sure.
it's just so much more powerful.
Thank you, Marla. For updating the action plan that we previously carried from the past school year, we talked a lot on starting this new school year with some more clarified expectations for in the classroom and ways in which students could model good behavior, just establishing like a new status quo ultimately for how students could be more accountable in their own learning, what kind of energy the teachers bring to that classroom environment as well to also model those new updated expectations. And we had a bit of, some pushback initially, but, week by week, it gets a little bit stronger. People are more receptive. They're more comfortable in their own environment. And it does help the students to be much more able to effectively communicate, not just with their teachers, who they typically are used to doing that with in the online setting, but they feel more content with who they're around and who they speak with as like a student to student dynamic too. So it has been a positive reflection there, but we're just trying to find a nice balance between like these new expectations and how it fits in to the action plans that we've had, and just kind of discussing if we need to tweak or alter some things along the way.
Thanks, Meredith. You actually walked into something that I was actually thinking about. Even as we prepared for this session, we start thinking about all different things. And you mentioned you had a little bit of a pushback. So, when you think about that barrier, what did your team do to overcome that barrier? Or how are you still working on that barrier?
Sometimes the pushback comes back from the parent. And so when we just really try and be transparent and very vocal as to why these new engagement strategies are a priority for us this school year and what we're hoping to achieve by implementing them, they are much more receptive to realize that it comes from a place of good intent, never from something negative or something that would be restrictive in the least. But when they understand the purpose and what we're hoping to be the overall accomplishment of everything, they seem to really kind of understand that, yes, this could be a valuable tool. And that if we try and do more measurable goals leading up to it, like, if you don't feel confident doing this like all 5 days a week, maybe let's just try for, a certain time increment on a particular day. And then on the following week, let's see if we can increase that a bit and find what is a nice balance between what's not too much for them too soon and what we're looking to try and achieve with the overall goals that we carved in. It's not the quickest of processes, but it does take a nice relationship building type of thing, because they understand that you're coming to a place where you want to compromise with them, and they're also bringing some willingness to want to do the same thing. So that's always beneficial, I believe.
I think it almost sounds like I paid Meredith to talk, but I really didn't. I don't believe that I had any prior conversation with Meredith on what these questions were going to be, but I'm curious of whether or not if Susan or Jane heard anything what Meredith said that really resonated with you, that you would want to capture and bring back to your teams, or even any one of us, because before I give Meredith another high five, because she deserves at least a couple there, because she mentioned at least 3 poignant thoughts.
I appreciate how you talked about the family piece and how it, that communication with families and that communication in what the expectations are and how it's actually helping their kids. And I know that the places I'm working, most of them are struggling with how do we communicate with families? How do we make sure that everybody understands this? How do we get their feedback?
Thank you, Jane. Appreciate that. that was one of the things that absolutely resonated with me as well. I know the work that BOSS has done with getting their families involved and how they've been bringing them along with them and being, I liked how Meredith, you used the word transparent with them, because they need to see that we're in this together, that we're working on this together. So kudos.
Marla, can I ask a question? Meredith, how did you set this up again to bring the parents in to have that communication, or did you send that how did you do it?
We have a few different ways. All of our class pages, so like period by period where students go, we have the behavior matrix ready and set. Prior to the beginning of the school year, we use a few different communication tools like through Parent Square. We updated final forms this year. We came up with a new phone system with Ring Central. So there's a lot of different avenues that teachers, myself included, admin, can reach out to families. That's a more approachable means of opening dialogue back and forth. Not everyone appreciates to talk on the phone or lives nearby and would want to come in. Some more so could do like a classroom session, like on their student's account. It just kind of depends. But I know that homeroom by homeroom, if any parent did kind of come to the table and say, you know, I'm curious about these engagement strategies that we're trying and what we're hoping to do with those, could we talk a little bit more? And then you just kind of broke down your roster and had those conversations on your planning period. Sent them some information on it if they asked for it, or if a conversation was what brought it to a nice point of contention, then we kind of just left it there. But I think it kind of just depends on how your parents prefer to be contacted or in what type of format they want to hold the conversation with you. And it just seemed to be really well received our way.
Meredith, that's what I was going to share, is that I give you a lot of kudos for breaking down those barriers. You are giving them lots of different ways to have them communicate. And I think that's fantastic. What has been your response? What do you think is the percentage? Maybe that's something that you can track, is showing maybe the growth of your parents getting involved. I think that's fantastic.
And they do have that. I don't know if they've started it yet this year, but I remember from prior PBIS meetings at the end of the school year, Madeline shared all that. So Meredith, I don't know if we're up to date with our percentage yet.
I don't know if we are either, but we meet this afternoon at 2, I believe. So maybe that's something we could reach out to Madeline about.
Okay, perfect. Perfect. So when we think about moving forward with those action plans, we know that we shared one of our favorites with you. We shared the Scale Up Action Plan. As you looked at it during the course of that video, were there any questions, or did you have any questions that you might have about that Scale Up Action Plan? And that could come from anyone. Because Matthew, if you could open up our Scale Up Action Plan, would that be possible?
Do you want to go to the next slide where it's on there, or the full?
We could do the next slide where it's on there. It's tiny, but we can look at it. Just a couple features that we want to make sure that you look at. And one of the things as a team we were talking about, and I have actually started doing this with some of my schools already, is we really wish that this document had like a place to put a vision. So as we've been moving forward in some of my other schools, and actually Meredith, you would have heard this afternoon, but now you can talk about it instead. I added a line up there at the top about what is your goal for this year? Because I know sometimes in talking about our action steps, we need to know where our end game is. And that simple statement has actually helped teams more so with moving forward with their action step. And I didn't do it on this one. I started doing it with individual schools. But it takes, the reason why we love this one so much is because it gives you so much guidance. And it gives you things to ask questions about. And the other most obvious reason is because it's directly connected to the TFI, which is absolutely your North Star. It is your navigator. It tells you what you need and what you want to strive for. Because we know that we do not have the exact requirements for this coming school year of the application process. But we do know that if we stay true to the TFI, we're going to be golden. And so that's always our advice to our teams. Stay true to this TFI, you cannot go wrong.
And I appreciate the scale up plan because the TFI can be very overwhelming and there's sometimes where there's multiple criteria within that TFI. So I really like how the scale up action plan breaks it down piece by piece into bite-sized chunks. But then at the same time, there's also some features that overlap. So as you're building one feature, you need to be aware of another feature. So for example, on this page 2 here, 1.2 and 1.10 need to both be considered at the same time. There's parts of both of those. So while you are considering your data, how are you going to share it with your staff and making sure that you're keeping all of this as cohesive as possible. So that's really why I like the scale up plan. I know it doesn't have a place for a score and it's not as nice for that, but really as a functional tool for moving your team forward with actionable steps. I really like the scale up version of this. And I've had a lot of people asking me lately, why not just use the regular one? Well, this really breaks it down into manageable chunks, I think.
And I love that aha that you brought forward. I actually had a team just on Tuesday that had an aha. And because again, we sometimes think of them as separate features, but they are intertwined and interlocked. And there's so many things that actually do, as Jessica said, overlap. And as a matter of fact, one of my high school teams was talking about this brochure that they want to create for their families and actually even sharing it with their library that happens to be literally right around the corner from their high school. And then as they were talking, they said, why can't we even add in what our status is and how we are doing with this as a simple blurb down at the bottom? And all of a sudden it dawned on them, not only are they reaching out to their community and doing that 1.11, not that you are ever going to be quizzed on those numbers, but maybe you might be, I don't know. But then they started saying, oh my goodness, that could actually help us with 1.15 too. So they were trying to get more movement by doing certain activities. Susan, I like your comment that how the review of the modules are on this scale up action plan. Absolutely. It tells you which area it comes from because we know the TFI is divided up into those 3 sections. Teams, well, tier 1 is teams, implementation, and then data. When you get into tier 2, it's teams, interventions, and then data. But thank you. So we also wanted to probably help you think about a way to bring this back to your team. So we wanted to do a little activity of actually going through an action step. So now I'm gonna wig Matthew out on again because I'm going to ask him to bring up something else now.
Okay.
And all of this is on your Padlet because now remember, this is your Padlet. This is your information. So that way you can share it in any way that you need to share it. Perfect.
Oh, there's like one.
I like how Jessica's giving him direction. So
Well-oiled machine over here.
we work collaboratively together. We actually all rely on each other nicely. So at the top, this would be sort of like an I do, we do, you do. So the next slide, thanks Matthew for making that a little bigger for my eyeballs. The little snippet at the top is helping us to stay focused. And so this one said, the scoring rubric indicated that Serendipity Elementary School, where else would we be but Serendipity, needs to ensure that the universal expectations are taught across all locations. And this was something that actually occurred. So as we work across the matrix, you are able to see that first we start with,
Yeah.
what do we think we need to start from? And it actually is systematically teaching all school-wide expectations across locations. That's what you want to see. That's your end game. So how will we do it? So the first step the team decided will be to review the lesson plans that are current to see if they're actually relevant. And who's going to be responsible? That has to come from your PBIS Universal team. What was their timeline? They were hoping to get this done by September 15. And how will they know that it was done? They'd actually have their lesson plans. But you know that we've talked about the fact that we need to get everybody's voice. So their next step to get voice was to share it out through their OIP and going straight to the TBTs. So they took it to the TBTs for their feedback. So again, people responsible. Well, the PBIS team members actually got it to the TBTs, but the TBTs were responsible for getting feedback to them. And they were doing it on their cycle. So by the end of September, they were hoping to have the feedback from the TBTs. Of course, there's always need for follow-up. There's always need for checking on those TBTs. That wasn't in their action plan, but they knew they might have to do that. Once they got it back, they reviewed the feedback, they made the changes that were necessary, and then they created that schedule of how the lesson plans will be taught. Again, who did that? The PBIS team. And sometimes this would be unique individuals, but for this case, because it was a teamwork, it had to be the team. They had that actually done, they had the schedule ready by September 30th. I know it sounds a little odd, but they were actually planning that as it was going along because it was really organic. And what their outcome was the schedule. And so then you can see it going through the whole process, all the way down to the launch date determination. And in that case, it was actually the administrator that was responsible for that launch date. The PBIS team shared with the administrator, they got to choose that date, and they chose hopefully November 1st is going to be their new launch date. And the way they knew that was done, it was through a office notification or an office email. So that was like going through the whole step. Let's look at the second one. This is it. Now, here's where we can think through this. And this is where I need your voices. And there's no one way of doing it. That's the other beauty. Sometimes teams might get stuck because they think there's one way to do it, but there isn't. There's multiple ways of doing it. So in this case, again, because it's the beginning of the year, most of our teams are using the scoring rubric to move themselves forward. So in this case, the scoring rubric indicated that the elementary school needed both parent and a high school student on their PBIS team. In that case, it's an elementary school. They don't have a high school student. So that is a Marley error. But actually, Meredith, you worked us through that already. But how would we actually document those strategies and practices? Let's make it yours, Meredith. Let's say we needed that high school student. What was our strategy was what?
I know that we kind of brainstormed among just committee members first, who we think would be a good fit or who could represent the student dynamic really well, who gave us, different perspectives to consider. We talked about, having a little bit of variation in the type of student that we select. We had a senior, his name was Adam, very involved student, always participated in any like outings, competitions that we had, a talent show, things like that. And Leah also just brings so many positive things to the table, and they kind of were like yin and yang, and they just bounced off one another really well, and they were supportive of one another's ideas. They kind of have been working in this instance. Leah has considered approaching some people that she think would be valuable additions to the student role on our PBIS committee. She has also said, you know, she's open to other suggestions if the different TBT groups want to supplement and come up with those other names. And I also thought of it just like an additional sort of win, if I could piggyback off my original one. The upperclassmen grades had a lot of suggestions for who could possibly join the committee with Leah from the student role. But a lot of the positive feedback we received from the lower grade levels, we have 4, 5, 6 suggestions of students that are in 9th grade, 4 suggestions of students that are in 10th grade. So for years to come, this is going to be a very well-rounded group of people that just want to bring that enthusiasm. And I think it's just really beneficial that there's, you know, increasing quantity of numbers of people that would be a great fit. It's not just, well, hopefully student A or student B will want to join us and we can move forward. No, there's a lot of different avenues we could pursue, which is awesome. We approached and kind of communicated what PBIS was to the student to see if it was a good fit for them, if that was something they wanted to consider to do, if they felt like they could positively contribute. I feel like we give the floor well, both to Adam when he was there and Leah nowadays. I don't believe she ever feels as if she has to kind of like hold back on her observations of things or suggestions for what could make things better. And that's what's so strong about it, is because you said she brings up points of view that, you know, sometimes we maybe perhaps as adults or just as educators in this sense kind of like maybe bypass. But she brings up something critical that we can't just overlook, which is always very important. She's patient. And I just think that we've done a really nice job of always making sure that her opinions are valued and heard. And she kind of sees us work those through like fruition and see that it's not just a talking point, but we implement that into the action plan then too.
So even though you spoke as what was done, if we were in the room as you guys were talking about it, what it would have looked like is we will, you know, the brainstorming by the PBIS team, then the student member will on the team is going to reach out to the other students that she thinks might be interested. Students will be asked, and who asked those students would be documented in that third column. TBTs will be contacted. Who contacted those TBTs? And then students will be told about what PBIS is at the school. And we would put in the who actually did that. So your team actually worked through this beautifully. So thank you for giving us that. Now, here is one of those items that we would like to actually brainstorm an obstacle that might actually be out there that we need to think through. And again, this could be Susan, it could be Jane, anybody that might be looking at their rubric that had an obstacle that we need to start thinking through, or how would we problem solve it?
Well, I can share. I think a couple of the districts that I support, one of the problems that they're having is that discipline policy, that handbook. How do we create an avenue? I'm thinking maybe we need to get the board more educated because all of that stuff has to go through the board. So how do we, I guess the obstacle is how do we implement all the wonderful things that we say we're doing in PBIS and really put that into the policy handbook that's board approved. I think that is a disconnection with some of the schools that I support. So how can we break that barrier? And maybe that takes time. I always tell the districts that takes some time to do, and it's not going to happen overnight. But I think just even educating the board on what we're doing would be helpful. But I could use some support with that.
Susan, I'm glad you brought that up because I actually have another school that was one of their focuses as well. And so in their action steps, they have assigned themselves the role of bringing PBIS into those board meetings. And they're one of the districts that each building takes a turn doing a share out. And they're trying to embed PBIS into to everything that they're sharing. So they might still be sharing literacy success as well, but they're adding that PBIS twist to it to try to start those conversations. And they also realize that this is going to take a long time to truly change district-wide policy. But those were some actionable items that they felt were manageable for them, that they're slowly just trying to bring an awareness, because you're right, there's a lot of board members who don't know what this really is. You know, they know it's required and that it's taking place, but to truly know what the work is and the benefits, it does take some time, but that was their actionable item. And they've assigned different people depending on what months that building was assigned to present at the board meeting, just to broaden the awareness.
So that really is brilliant, because this would be one of those things that you can't change in a year, but you can absolutely impact in a year by doing. And I think, Susan, you hit the nail right on the head right from the beginning, by educating, enlightening, and by always making it visible. So Jessica, as you were talking, I was thinking the first action step was they actually are going to come up with a schedule of how to present what PBIS is to the board at board meetings.
Yeah, and I even thought, with some of the districts, because we've been talking about it at the DLT and getting the superintendent involved, right? Because that would be really important. But I said, what a great opportunity to share that you guys were bronze recognized. So take that as a celebration and start, going to the board maybe with, that little example, and then showing them how did we get that recognition. And then, like you were saying, Marla, having quarterly or monthly, having that on the agenda would be really important. So that's a great idea.
So I just started getting some of those ideas in there, but I think we can actually sort of see how you can take this back and work this process. Even though we're thinking broadly right now in big items, this is also even a process you would use, say, for example, and this is something that never happens anywhere. Well, Meredith, probably not for you, but maybe our hallways are not as orderly or as positive as we want them to be. And so that might be at the beginning of a concern that we want to begin to problem solve through. So our end game would be, we want our hallways to be whatever your expectations are. So I'm going to say responsible, our students to be responsible, respectful, and safe in our hallways. But we'd have to start looking at the why. Why is this happening? And as we dig down, we might come up with the fact that maybe our hallways need more adult presence. So you would work that through. What was the strategy? How are we going to actually move forward on this? Who's going to take it? How are we going to inform the timeline? And how will we know it's done? In this case, we know our timeline is a lengthy one. But in the hallway situation, you might actually be able to move quicker through an action step to show the evidence of moving forward. Do you think this is something that, or how do you think this is something you could use with your teams?
I think it could definitely add purpose and give some additional thought in an organized way in overcoming perceived barriers or perceived barriers to the action steps, or just understanding of who moves forward when, where, how, making sure that's very clear. So I'd like this as an additional piece for organization and focus.
Thank you, Jane. Actually, it was one of our teams that we were working with this week that as we were talking through their PBIS meeting and the note taker, as we were talking about this, she actually embedded a chart similar to this, not identical to this, right into their meeting minutes. So that way it becomes something that they always think through. So, and you are so right. The whole idea is it embodies what PBIS is. We're hoping PBIS is proactive and not always responsive. So when we plan, we can be more proactive. And I like how you said, remove some of those barriers that we might run into. So I hope you find this is something that you can use and that it is something that will benefit your teams moving forward.
Yeah, I was
But-
just gonna say, Marla,
Yes.
I see myself using the action plan that I shared with you guys earlier with the feedback, with the SST feedback. And I see this being linked right on it. So then it can help me with them, like giving a timeline, like when will this be done? And how will we know? I like those two thought processes. So then we have an end game. So I think, and we have to give ourselves grace because like the one that they got a 1 on, right? That policy, we have to give ourselves grace. That might be a couple years. So I tell the teams all the time, it's okay that you got a 1. Look at all the great things that you did. You got 2s on. Let's celebrate that. But this will help us at least give a timeline of where we want it to be at the end. So I like that.
Thanks, Susan. And I so appreciate the conversation about those areas that they did well in. Because you do want to celebrate those. And then as a team, you always want to think about at the end of the year, we need to evaluate those. Did they really work? Are we still in the same place? Is there anything we need to change? So it's a beautiful journey. And it's sort of, I know sometimes we like to arrive, but it's one of those things where we're always on that journey, but we get to celebrate wonderful vistas. If I'm using that word correctly.
You know, seeing this, it very much reminds me of one of the schools that we worked with last year. They were dead set on applying for silver recognition at the end of the year. And in order to do so, and I got to do their TFI at the end of the year. So I got to sit in on a team meeting and I could hear through their conversation that like every 2 months, they were using the TFI and every 2 months they checked back in with those, in their case, with the features that they were specifically trying to implement. They checked in every 2 months to go, hey, how are we doing with this? Where are we at with this? That way, by the end of the year, they knew that when it came time to do that, to complete the TFI, they knew where they stood, and they knew it before April. Because they were doing it again. I can specifically remember the months that they did it in, because I was like, wow, here's a team that's actually leveraging the TFI to help move the team to where they really want to be. And they didn't talk about clear actionable steps, but obviously they had them in place or they wouldn't have gotten to where they did. But this makes me think about, that them doing that and the things that they had to have in place. Again, I don't know as if they had them written down any place. I could have asked them that. But they obviously did, or they wouldn't have, they wouldn't have gotten to where they did. And in their time frame was obviously by the end of the year, but they were also checking in on some of those things every 2 months. So it was like, we also had checkpoints along the way. It was, they were gauging the temperature throughout the year to make sure that they were getting to where they wanted to be. And not, not just leaving it up to, chance.
I would imagine for them, it was probably a very much of an organic conversation, talking about, well, who can do this? When do you think we can have it done? It's not prescribed, but this framework actually helps you stay true to your work. But thanks for remembering that, Matthew. But I get to actually turn us over to Jessica, but we get to have a little bit of a break first. So if you can set your clocks, and Matthew's going to actually have our little timer up there as well. But we were thinking about 10 minutes and then you can come back and join us.
Welcome back. Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for coming back.
Thanks for sticking around or coming back.
And I hear we might be getting another person to join us. Stacy's also quite awesome from Boss.
Yeah. Those boss ladies are amazing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Okay, so we are gonna move on to the next section. This is an action plan calendar. So we've talked in great deal about your action plan and how to add those actionable items with the addition of that timeline. When do you hope to accomplish these different tasks? And then, of course, what does it look like? And another possible resource you could use with your team is once you have defined what actions you plan to take and that time along with it, you can pull those into your own team's calendar just to make sure that you know what those checkpoints are. There's clearly things that you should be doing every single month, but depending on what items you added to your actions for the year, you might just need that extra little reminder to keep your team in check. So here we have a tier 1 and a tier 2 example of some actionable items that your team or teams have already considered. So maybe the beginning of the year, August or September, your tier 1 team is going to reevaluate and define your team members. You're going to work on your meeting roles and your meeting schedule. So that could be on your plan, even maybe in May. You said that you were going to do this in August or September, depending on when your school year starts. And when are you going to move forward with your TFI? When are you going to write out those actionable steps that you plan to take for the whole year? We do know, as we've spoken earlier, that you might have other actionable items based on your data, which also comes with the future discussion. But really just laying it out. Matt, could you do me a favor and click on is it not in there? Oh, yes, it is. You have to, it's not a clicker. Do you see the sample action plan calendar? It was in for that. Thanks. Sorry. So we gave you some different options here, depending on just the way that your team likes to look at it. So this one has each month just going across in the different columns, and these are just pulled directly from the TFI. And again, this is purely a sample. Then even from the TFI, you have some of those annual items that you'll want to schedule with your team. So when do you plan to do your TFI? When do you plan to do walkthroughs? When do you plan to use the self-assessment survey? And make sure you then add it into your action plan, but also make sure that it's put into your calendar. And if that's happening more than once, talk with your team. When do we want to accomplish this? And then again, what's it going to look like when that has been achieved? Who's responsible for doing that? So here we have one for tier 1, and then there's another one for tier 2. Just again, this is all pulled directly from the TFI. So if you've set your vision or your goals for the year, you want to customize it to your actual needs. But Matt, if you can click on the vertical list, this is just a vertical version of this,
Depends on which way your brain
it
works.
really is. So it's purely on what works best for you. But I know a lot of schools have calendars for when are you going to do your different testing and when are you going to implement this and that. And I hadn't really seen it done with PBIS, with the TFI features, and really making sure to check in each month. So I know that some teams will even say, okay, we're having a team meeting, and that's essential every single month. We need to make sure that we're defining our meeting roles, because if your team is just getting started, you're going to want to have that reminder. Hey, who's recording? Who's our timekeeper? Who brought the data today? So this was just kind of working through. Again, there are very specific items that you'll need to add to your calendar that makes it uniquely yours. And then again, any other growth opportunities you've already defined, you're going to want to put in there. I also added what takes place during the meeting, but then there's other features that need to take place outside of that meeting, and that information should be brought back then to the team. Who's responsible for completing that? Who's responsible for bringing it back? And you even have the completed on date column over there as well, so that it can be very specific. We're bringing this back to this meeting, or, you know, the team can use this. So let's say during your October meeting, you know that you need to do those informal walkthroughs sometime during October. Well, when is that taking place? Who is doing those? So that's where you could put that person responsible. And then when are they hoping to accomplish that task? So that then in November, you can go back and say, okay, somebody was supposed to be doing these. Did it take place? How do we know? What was our evidence? What did that
Jessica,
look like?
can I interrupt and ask a question? So when people are collecting the walkthroughs for their PBIS, how often, because you said like in November, like how often do you see people collecting? We're still struggling with that with some of our teams.
I have seen it done as little as once a year. I've seen it done quarterly, but honestly, the most impact I've seen is when it's done monthly, and by assigning somebody responsible that the staff and the students are comfortable enough doing. Just, again, it's an informal walkthrough, and some teams
Just once a month though? I mean, if they just did once a month to do this is where we are currently with our implementation of the framework, you think that would be sufficient?
Oh, I think that would be amazing data, especially if you get enough sample size of students and staff members to really see, do you know those expectations? Are you receiving that acknowledgement system? Are you using that acknowledgement system? I think once a month would be great. I mean, the more data, I guess, the better, because it makes you more comfortable and a little more confident in that process. But I think once a month would be adequate.
It absolutely is like a formative assessment.
Mhm.
It allows you to know whether or not you have a particular grade, maybe that needs a little bit more attention. My friend sometimes calls it customer service. To make sure, do we need to review these expectations maybe for this grade? Or is there maybe a particular group of students that needs another maybe dosage of explaining what these expectations look like, sound like, and feel like. That way, when you do the formal walkthrough in March or April, whenever you do it, it's not like culture shock. Our kiddos are used to answering that question. Our scholars are used to answering how many times they received a shout out or a boss bravo. So it makes it more comfortable, and then I think more authentic.
Mm-hmm. And that also, if you do have an external evaluator being the one to do that formal walkthrough, which, you know, we know is a requirement for silver and gold, but it's also helpful to have an external person kind of just get a different feel for it. It also helps us to know, how did you ask them before? Because you have to be very unique in the way that you do ask those questions, because every school is different, every system is different, and that's a beautiful thing, but that also assists us with knowing the way to get the information from the students that isn't coerced or isn't uncomfortable, because we do want to see what success has taken place, because we do know that there is a lot of success out there, but having us ask the right questions is very helpful.
I oftentimes share, we had one school, an elementary school, where they were doing this, actually probably more than just monthly at the beginning. But they discovered that their youngest students, their kindergarten students, were having a difficult time. They actually employed a puppet to go along with them. And so the puppet asked the students, and there was just more of a comfort level. Now, of course, it was a puppet from their classroom. It wasn't some strange monster or something, but they found that they had a much higher response. Now, it could have been the puppet, or it could have been the extra couple weeks of practicing in the classroom. Either way, I don't think it's harmful to try some sort of prop like that. But Jessica, I love this because it actually helps you to be more proactive and purposeful. I actually do have schools already scheduling their final TFI with me. I have schools that are already scheduling when they want their surveys to go out. So it's never too early to plan for those things.
Yeah, and with some of those items, when do you schedule those? When have you traditionally had those? And have you thought about it this early in the year? Or do you usually wait until a little later in the year to determine when you're going to implement something like the TFI walkthrough or the formal TFI? Or even that self-assessment survey? When do you traditionally schedule those for your teams?
And this even thinking about you, Jane, like maybe you can already be planting that seed for your schools to already schedule that time with you. Because we know what it's like when it comes down to that time. We feel like we're scrambling, but if they already get it on their schedule. And one of the things I'm trying to suggest is by no later than late March. That way they have it done and in the books and they have that feeling of confidence that they're not worrying about that piece.
And then they have the time to truly decide on the actionable steps based on that.
Absolutely.
Because that's really the point of it. It's not to catch you. It's an assessment to help drive instruction, to drive implementation.
It's a tool.
Yeah, even scheduling the best time to do the SAS. I don't struggle as much with the TFI, and I don't want to take over this. I know we have people from Buckeye who probably have some great questions, but scheduling the SAS is where I struggle more than with scheduling the TFI. And then, I know that I have the PBIS apps coordinator, but I would like to see it move more towards people owning that themselves and making those decisions themselves with my coaching. So I'm trying to move that way.
And Jane, you'll know when they're ready for that. You'll see it. I mean, I do have a couple schools that have taken on that ownership. So, but you still always will be there to guide them through that process. The rule of thumb that I use for the SAS is I look back historically to see when they give it or have given it. And then we try to stay on that annual basis. But the other piece of evidence that I bring into the mix is I try not to do too early in the school year because you need things to get up and running. So usually after the first 9 weeks, you're pretty safe to do the SAS. But if you do it too early, the results certainly are not going to represent the good work that you are beginning to do at the beginning of the school year. Meredith, I know you shared something in the chat, but it came straight to me. So I don't know if you wanted to share that out loud because, and your walkthroughs are going to look different than everybody else's walkthroughs.
Right. One of the items, I believe it was from our last coaches meeting, Marla. I mean, you can correct me if I have the dates wrong, but you had brought up that, a certain percentage, the last time we were in this dynamic, the amount of your own staff who couldn't adequately kind of carve out or explain what all the expectations are through your PBIS initiatives that you implement at school. And so we did discuss and talk to our TBTs, group by group, that we would be doing those informal walkthroughs through the month of October just to see how different people implement these systems and how the rewards are distributed and for what instances, so on and so forth. I'm sure once we kind of pull over the data in the month that's collected from this round, we'll kind of have to reevaluate or determine if we do any type of training sessions just from PBIS committee to general education staff to see if we're, missing anything or if there's something that we could do better perhaps, and then maybe determine if we have to reevaluate or do additional walkthroughs as the school year progresses. But I think you said 67% of staff can't adequately describe 90% of the matrix. What was that?
That's pretty good. Yeah, it's just flipped.
Yeah.
Oh,
You want to
sorry.
have
Sorry.
90% of your staff at least know, but you were
My bad.
awesome, Meredith. You had those two numbers. I can't tell you how long it took me to get those two numbers
Yeah.
in my head. Because again, a Marla-ism is Marla wants 100% of the time, but I have to set my.
But we also give grace.
We give grace.
Understand.
Mhm.
Yeah. That's great to hear.
That's powerful. And you said exactly what you're supposed to do with that data. Once you get it, what's that data telling you? What are you going to do about it? And how will you know if you're successful? Those are beautiful questions to ask yourself. I'm going to take Meredith on the road with us.
I know, right? Well, with that, why don't we look a little bit further at that data that was shared during our video that we delivered last week.
Yeah, we delivered.
So we did want to just pause for a moment here. This was the data dashboard that was shared during our little mock meeting that we filmed for you. And this was, we don't have to pull up the actual thing because, you know, it's going to go slow. But this was kind of that overall summary chart that we looked at. And as a team, we came up with some themes that we were observing that we wanted to have a discussion about. And then we dug a little deeper into that. But I will be open and honest. We practiced that recording several times before actually recording it. And every time we looked at it, we focused on a different data set. We had a completely different conversation. So before we even get into that meeting format, was there anything else in this data? And if you didn't get to preview it beforehand, even in looking at that, I know it's kind of small. Was there anything in that data set that drew your attention right away that you wanted us to focus on, or that you probably would have focused on right away with your team?
And Jessica, I don't want to interrupt their thoughts, but
Yeah.
we did have a new person that just joined us, but I lost them again. Oh, no, Jeremy has joined us. So I wanted to make sure that Jeremy, and I sent it to only Meredith. I want to make sure Jeremy has our sign-in sheet, our Padlet,
Absolutely.
and all of our information. And
Here comes Stacy.
here comes Stacy. So I'm going to hold on for 1 second, Jeremy, before I hit enter, so that way I can get Stacy in the room. Okay, Jessica, sorry.
Sure. So again, just to get everybody back on this, when you look at this data set, what would be something that immediately draws your attention that maybe your team would start discussing right away? And also. I just shared that link in the chat, just in case you wanted to try to look at that.
And this piece is an extension of our conversation from this morning, from earlier this morning, on how we action plan. And Meredith, again, demonstrated this. What will this data tell us we need to do? And there is not one way to go through it.
Mm-hmm.
It's like a bear hunt. You can't go over it, can't go under it. You have to go through it.
It's working hard.
I know. There she is. If you click the snowman icon, you should be able to view the report full screen. Or present, excuse me.
I have never called that the snowman icon.
I'm so sorry. Yeah, hamburger or snowman when it's circles over for snowman.
There, a little bit more.
But I like this, Jessica, because it shows all the different pieces we're supposed to be looking at. Location, time of day, grade level. I know that we don't get into specific names per se as easily here, but you definitely see the behavior type. So it's hitting all of those big fives. that we need to look at. And then, of course, we always think about those additional ones, like, do we have a student group that we need to pay attention to? And is there maybe a particular other situation that is calling our attention?
Now, in our discussion, one of the first things that we pointed out were two successes, two celebrations. And I know that sometimes that's hard for us to start with because, you know, our team meetings, we only have so much time and we really just want to fix the problems. But I appreciated it, even in our mock discussion, the time to stop and go, what's working well? Because you also don't want to mess that up if at all possible. So do you take the time to celebrate any of your successes with your data set when you're looking at whatever your data is?
Meredith shared, because they don't have location per se.
Yeah.
The first one that they would look at is time of day.
Yeah.
Because I don't know what gaggle is, Meredith. I mean, I'm going to pretend to be able to explain that one, but she's
It's what-
gaggling somewhere. I don't know what it is, but
Stacy can help correct me. And we also, is Securely also one we use, but it's one that kind of like trips the system or alerts our administrators if there's like concerning text or words that are used in like a Google search or inside some other programs that they would use at school that would be alarming or kind of trigger just like a chain reaction of like, should we contact this student? What do we think the concern is? What are we wanting to try and either remedy or correct with what's going on? Sometimes they're, you know, very severe search terms or whatnot, and that would indicate a whole other response. Some of them are just behavior based. It just kind of depends.
Right, yeah, administrators will get that, and then at our last meeting, we were trying to figure out how we can put that information out there, but still honor the privacy of it, I guess. So that was kind of something that we might talk to our Mr. Lepar. He's ahead of our tech department on maybe if we can come up with something that way on how to put the data out there, yet still keep the privacy of the student. Now, of course, if it was something very alarming, you know, we would need to know who the student was, but data wise to keep it private, you know, so we're trying to look into those types of things.
thank you, Stacy, and welcome.
Yes, thank you. And thank you for sharing that. Yeah, student privacy is always important and can be challenging depending on the platform of the discussion. Thank you.
Sure.
Jessica, though, I like how you pulled out the fact we have to celebrate our wins, just as we started today with our wins.
It can be very defeating if all we're doing is just focusing on what's wrong and how do we improve. While that is critically necessary, we also have to stop and celebrate what are we doing well? What success have we had?
Well, that actually generates more success too.
Oh, yeah.
Success begets success.
Yep.
I think that also speaks to, like, you have to have a way for your data to sort of come alive. You know, like if you're always just looking at numbers, they don't always do the justice to either your celebrations or even the areas that you need to focus on, which I think when you have, and I'm not saying that school districts have to do anything like what we have on the screen here, but you have to have a way for those numbers to be represented in a different way than just tally marks or you know, numerals. So because when you start to see it come alive on a page like this, it's easy to gravitate towards those bars that are really high, the bars that are really low, and you start to ask all those questions about, well, why is that one higher? What is that exactly? Because your eyes immediately gravitate towards, you know, right now I'm looking at the pie charts at the bottom. It's really easy to look at gender and go, huh?
Yeah,
it is.
Yeah.
It's easy to look at the gender and go, man, we got a lot of females represented in those numbers, 78.3% compared to males. So is that an over-identification of females? What exactly are we doing? Is that something that we need to look into? And the same thing goes with all the other graphs. it just becomes easier to look at them when they say more to you, I guess. I don't know if that speaks to anybody, but that's how I always feel like you're the way you collect your data has to tell a story.
And as the meeting facilitator, you will have to ask those questions to help them focus on what data you want them to see, what data. You might have to ask those questions if they go straight to what's not right, to help them see that there are good things happening. Because again, when you show success, you are more apt to get people to come with you.
And with that, I'll also say, depending on your team size, the facilitator might also delegate that or assign that to a specific team member that prior to the meeting, they're going to be the one that really looks at the big picture of this data and points out maybe 3 celebrations and 3 areas that they think the team should consider moving forward with, but still always presenting the full data to the team, but maybe just in the sake of time, assigning a separate person just that data responsibility to keep the actions moving forward. And that way it's not everything is on that facilitator role, that you can start to divvy up those responsibilities. So with those responsibilities, we can move on back into our slideshow and talk a little bit more about the team structure that we shared. We're really making Matt work today.
He's sweating over here. We put way too many links in there and way too many different
Yeah.
places.
We do apologize.
If Zoom was just a little bit more friendly as far
Well,
as moving around on.
It's better than Teams.
Hopefully we didn't offend anybody with that, but yeah, we're more comfortable here. So, nope, we're not quite there yet. Sorry. It's tricky because it's the same graphic for once in a video.
Yeah.
So during our team discussion that we did mock up, like I said, we had very different conversations as we practiced that in advance of recording it. But if you had an opportunity to view that, did you notice any specific roles that were being utilized during that discussion? Also, I should ask, were any of you able to watch the video before today?
No worries.
It's okay.
No worries.
We appreciate that you're here regardless of that.
But don't you think they could easily take this video back and even use this with their team to practice
Yes.
data analysis?
And that is something that we want to build for you after this discussion. We do want to make this a functional resource for your teams. So we're tossing around the idea of even having some discussion questions for your team to use to watch the video together. It's only a 20-minute video.
Yep.
It's just shy of 20 minutes.
Just over 20 minutes.
Oh, excuse me, I'm a liar.
Which I'm really happy that we were able to keep it as concise as we did.
So obviously, it's probably missing some pieces that maybe your teams would have in your discussion. We really focused on that data piece.
It's not an exemplar.
Right, it's an example of a possible discussion. So if you do have the opportunity to watch that video, I encourage you to watch how we interact with each other, showing off the different roles that you should have in your high quality meetings. And that it is a true team discussion, in that we had a facilitator that was kind of getting everything up and off the ground and running, but we also had somebody that was purely responsible for capturing what was happening during that meeting, capturing that discussion and making sure to include any actionable steps into that action plan that we spent so much time talking about earlier today. We also had somebody keeping time to make sure that we were staying on track, and just watching for those different roles. With that, I will also say we were probably missing some important roles.
Quite a few.
Yeah, because there was just the three of us, but we do know that some schools do have smaller teams. So being able to still have all of those different roles covered, even in a smaller membership. Another question, again, this is, you can see the screen preview. This was the only data source that we focused on during our discussion. And that was purely just the behavior data. Is there any other data that your schools are currently looking at or plan to look at that guide your discussions, your team discussions?
We look at grades at the end of the 9 weeks, see who's not passing, and we'll use that. And also attendance, we'll look at those two pieces.
That's great. And I'm hearing more and more schools that are integrating that into their PBIS discussions, especially attendance is very popular now. Attendance has slowly been coming into that discussion. And that it doesn't have to take place just in TBT or just in your BLT. Your PBIS team should absolutely include that in their discussions, but also including that attendance data, because your PBIS system can absolutely make an impact on your attendance. Thank you for sharing that.
It definitely would be one of those things that I would include in my decision rules.
Yes. So I would also make sure that your team knows what are your different data sources, what are you looking for? And as Marla just said, what are your decision rules for that? And if you haven't seen, there is a decision rules video, I don't know what to call it. It's not a module, but
Montage.
sure, with a discussion guide that we are actually planning to reboot for our next coaches meeting, no, our next office hours. I'm so sorry. So our next office hours, which is in December, will be around that decision rule reboots. So if even thinking through other data sources is foreign to you or is something that you is a weakness or a growth opportunity for your school, we encourage you to come back for that December office hours offering. Just like today, we'll provide you with a video in advance that kind of walks you through what we want to have a discussion for. And then you can come to the live meeting to have that discussion about decision rules. And then any other information that we can, of course, add to that as well.
Do you mind if I add?
Not at all.
Add something to ponder? A lot of the things that you were talking about as far as those data sources were obviously student outcome data. And I know Julie, when she was first here this morning, talked about the adult data piece, but I also wanted to bring something to ponder about, because all of those things are externalizing behaviors. We see them, we hear them, we might even feel them in some cases. But what about those internal behaviors that we don't oftentimes see as easily? Because, those interfering behaviors that are quite overt catch our attention much easier. But I just want to share with the team, keep your eyes open, especially for those other behaviors that aren't so overt, which might even be harder for our ladies that are from BOSS,
Right.
because you're not seeing them directly right in front of you. So you have to really be that kid watcher, that scholar watcher.
Yeah. Well, and I really think as you're looking deeper into your attendance data, sometimes those root causes go all the way back into some internalized behaviors as well. Yeah. Well, with that, we will move on to our binder reminders. So we've covered a lot of different actionable items here.
I wasn't sure if Jeremy was waving. to
Yeah, no,
us
he's
or-
stretching out his shoulders. He was lifting this morning.
Or didn't take his electric on.
I got a funny light system. I have a new office. It's kind of strange.
It forces you to stretch though. It's good.
I did get a lift in this morning though, but
So with that, we hope again, as you're watching the video, if you haven't had a chance to yet, that you can listen for some of those binder reminders, some of that possible evidence. So even as Marla beautifully mentioned in her activity earlier today, how will we know? That was one of the columns there. How will we know we've achieved this actionable step? Well, that how will we know becomes your evidence. So just as we said, maybe you can delegate somebody's responsible for bringing the data to the team. I also encourage you to delegate somebody to put your evidence into the binder. And I would even encourage you to do, it's a team role. So maybe that person bringing the data is also responsible for including it in the binder, or the person who is taking your meeting minutes. They're the person that not only captures that story and that journey that your team is experiencing, but then they are also the ones who then bring it into the binder. I would have somebody in charge of your acknowledgement system that's just keeping tabs on what's happening, and they're the person adding it to the binder. That way you have lots of hands in that binder. It's everyone's responsibility and everyone knows what's happening. And it's truly memorializing your team's journey. And yes, we know that it's essential for the recognition process, but the recognition process is to recognize great work. And what you're really aiming for is an amazing system that's implemented with fidelity. So have any of you begun starting to collect any evidence for what you've achieved yet this year?
we do an academic awards assembly annually, so we're looking at those students. So that's always November 17th. That's always a big recognition with honor roll, merit roll. That's coming. So we'll look at and see who earned that. So that'll be the 9 weeks ends next week. So we'll start, we can start seeing that information. And the high school did very well on the school report card. So there were, there was talk about doing an event for them to recognize the outstanding efforts from last year. So yeah, so there are some like celebrations that people want to do.
That's fantastic. And I would continue to encourage you to capture those celebrations, share them out, not just within your building, but throughout the whole community,
Yeah.
to continue to celebrate beyond just your school walls. That's fantastic to hear. With that, do we want to move on to some optimistic closure? Sure. So at the beginning of our session, I know that not all of you were here at the beginning, but in our note-taking document, we did have some intention setting for what you hoped to gain through today's discussion. We wanted you to just take a minute to go back to that intention. If you didn't have one set because you hopped in a little bit later, that's perfectly fine. We wanted to give you an opportunity to write down some actionable steps that you plan to do moving forward with the information that we've provided you. So what do you plan to take from our discussion, or do you want to dig deeper into? When are you going to move forward with that? And what are you going to do with this information? So we're just going to give you a minute to kind of think through and jot down what you're going to do moving forward with this.
We are hopefully modeling for you what we'd like all of our teams to do. So even starting with each of us.
We're going to clarify our big five. We have some good systems to pull in data, and it's pretty easy to look at, but I think we can be a little more specific on that, because we have a database that pulls that information. It's not as aesthetically pleasing as that piece that you have that has all the areas, but we can still do a better job of that and just making it more transparent or clear when we have the issues. I just was hoping the binder, the online binder, so just to record the evidence. That's what I was. That's what I wanted to see.
Do you need us to send that to you, Jeremy?
Yeah, that'd be great. Yeah,
Now, just as another reiteration, we do not know the exact evidence pieces that they are going to require for next year. But as long as you, again, I'm sorry, I'm repeating myself, but stay true to that TFI
yeah.
and stay true to your evidence that you want to see, you're going to be right on track.
Yeah, okay, good, yeah. That's been fun. I've been in each of the buildings in our district and, starting to see the different things that they do in each, and it's, I've enjoyed it.
I'm glad you're there, Jeremy.
Yeah, yeah. And it's not a problem at all to send you that binder. I'm glad you said that because we can even add that into our Padlet as another resource.
We can also send it out on our follow-up email from this meeting. So we can send it to everybody. Anybody who already had one from last year can easily copy the one that they have to update their information. I always suggest don't get rid of your last year's information because again, it's part of your journey. It really is a win-win on so many different levels. Because if a parent comes into you and asks you a question, you can say, we did this. If your board member asks you something about a concern he heard, you can say, we have this in place. So.
Absolutely. And you're getting more and more of that. Hey, we do have this program.
Perfect.
Yeah.
And Susan said she's supporting a district with an agenda. So I placed the sample plan calendar on the agenda. Nice.
That's great. Thank you. Well, again, out of respect for your time, we're gonna move on to our final activity here is if you could please take a minute to fill out our post-event survey. We absolutely read through this and use it to move ourselves forward. We use it to create our own action plan for how we can improve our offerings to all of you. So we appreciate you taking the time to give us that very valuable feedback.
It is on the QR code, but it's also in the chat box. But please make sure the link that's in the chat box, you were able to open it and it actually takes you to the location that we want you to go to. Thank you, Susan, for everything that you do to support PBIS in your schools. So appreciate you and celebrate you.
Well, I appreciate it today. I was taking a lot of notes and putting it on my own little PBIS Google Doc that's running, and I love this action plan calendar. I'm going to chunk it out, but I think it's been really valuable. So I thank you for that.
Well, we wanted to thank all of you for being active participants in our discussion. We know it's very vulnerable to talk in a setting like this, in a small group setting. We appreciate you taking the time to join us today. It would have been very lonely with just the three of us. So
we always talk to each other.
Yeah.
People to talk to.
We do encourage you to, man, can you give me the next slide? I'm so sorry. I don't want to say the wrong dates. So we do have another coaches meeting with just a slightly different formats to this office hours discussion. But it's our coaches network meeting that's going to take place November 3rd, and we have additional ones throughout the year. And then our next office hour session will take place on December 1st. So again, it'll be the same kind of flipped classroom formats that will push out a video in advance with some resources for you to kind of preview. And then you'll come here ready for a discussion. And it can be individuals or you can bring a whole team. It's completely up to you, but we will, of course, also share this recording and share additional resources afterwards. But we appreciate you taking the time and being involved in our discussion. It was a really good discussion.
I think everybody followed our expectations today.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much.
Have a beautiful day.
Yeah, I appreciate all the support.
Anytime, Jeremy.
Anytime.
Have a wonderful weekend as well. I know it's not Friday, so don't get excited, but have a wonderful weekend.
Okay, thank you, guys. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
This speech is my recital. I think it's very vital.
Just for you, Meredith.
That is for Meredith. All right, Meredith, go.